A woman with a clipboard marched up and told him to move his boat, loud, proud, and certain she was in charge. What she didn't know, the man she was barking at owned the entire lake, and her fishing club's days were numbered. It was a little past 7:30 a.m. when Clarence Rucker backed his truck into the gravel lot at Mayfield Lake, just outside of Springfield, Missouri. The sun hadn't fully crested the tree line yet, and the water was still glassy, untouched. Clarence, 47, had been looking forward to this for weeks. He'd spent most of the previous night prepping his old polished aluminum fishing boat for this very morning. Quiet, peaceful, just him, a thermos of hot coffee, and the lake his father used to bring him to as a kid. He was just beginning to unhitch the trailer when he heard the rapid crunch of footsteps. Turning around, he saw her, mid-50s, short blonde hair, sunglasses already perched on her head despite the low sun. She held a clipboard like it was a badge of authority, and wore the kind of forced smile that never reached her eyes. "You can't park that here," she called out sharply. Clarence blinked. "I'm sorry." She marched closer. "This lot is private for community use only. You need to move that boat." Clarence set the wrench down on the trailer hitch and stood up. "Morning." "You live here?" "I'm on the HOA board," she said, emphasizing it like it meant more than it did. "And you're not on the list of permitted lake users. The lake's restricted to the Mayfield Hills Fishing Club. You're trespassing." He looked past her, scanning the lake's edge. Nobody else was there, just him. "Didn't see a sign." "There's one posted near the pavilion," she said flatly. "You must have missed it." Clarence gave a small nod. "I fished here plenty of times. Never had a problem." "Well, you've got one now," she snapped, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "Either you move your boat or I call this in." Clarence took a breath, trying to keep his tone level. "What's your name?" "Teresa Holcomb," she said, standing taller like she expected the name to mean something to him. "And yours?" "Clarence Rucker," she scribbled something. "That boat registered to you?" "It is." "Well, Clarence," she said, voice dripping with condescension, "I'm sure you're just unaware of the rules. But you can't just show up and dump your boat wherever you like. We've had issues before, people leaving trash, breaking things. This area is for residents and their guests under supervision." He watched her. There was something about the way she said "people" that rubbed him wrong. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt it. The way she looked at him like she'd already decided who he was and what he represented. "I'm not breaking anything," he said. "Just trying to enjoy the water." "You need to pack up and leave now." There was a pause. A long one. Clarence looked down at the gravel, then back at the lake. He turned back to her. "You sure you want to push this?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You might want to double-check your information," he said evenly. "I think you're mistaken about who owns this lake." Teresa actually laughed, sharp and shrill. "Is that supposed to intimidate me? Do you know how long I've lived here?" Clarence didn't flinch. "Do you know who purchased this lake 3 years ago? Who maintains it? Pays taxes on it? Signed off on your fishing club's access in the first place?" For a second, her face shifted. It was small, a flicker of uncertainty, but it vanished just as fast. "You're bluffing," she said. Clarence walked back to his trailer and clipped the line back onto the boat. "All right, you do what you have to do." "I will," she said. "You'll be hearing from the board." But Clarence wasn't bluffing, and Teresa had just started a fight she wasn't ready for. By 9 a.m., Clarence was already on the water, drifting near the reeds at the lake's eastern edge. He cast his line quietly, not in a rush, not even really expecting to catch much. The air was cool and calm, but his peace didn't last long. A white golf cart appeared near the dock. From a distance, Clarence could already tell who it was. Same posture, same quick movements. Teresa Holcomb, but this time she wasn't alone. A man with a windbreaker and a radio clipped to his belt was seated beside her. Likely one of the HOA's contracted security guys. They stopped at the edge of the dock. Teresa planted her feet wide like she was commanding a courtroom. "Clarence Rucker," she shouted across the water. "This is your final warning." Clarence reeled in his line slowly, turned his chair, and waved. "Morning again, Teresa. I've contacted the sheriff's office. You're in violation of HOA regulations. You are to leave the premises immediately." The man beside her looked uncertain. He leaned toward her, whispered something. She shook her head, cutting him off. Clarence stayed seated, calm, hands folded in his lap. That man with you? He got a badge or just a walkie? Teresa stiffened. You don't need to worry about that. Well, Clarence called out, if you're going to accuse someone of trespassing on private land, you might want to make sure you're not the one trespassing first. The security guard, young, probably mid-20s, finally stepped forward. Sir, can I ask what your business is on the lake? Clarence nodded. You can ask. I'm fishing. Are you a resident of Mayfield Hills? No. Then I'm going to have to ask you to come ashore. Clarence pulled his tackle box closer, not getting up. You ever hear of Crescent Holdings? The young man paused. Can't say I have. Figures, Clarence said. They're a private trust. They bought this land and the lake 3 years ago. It's owned and managed by them. I'm the sole trustee, Teresa scoffed. What, you expect us to believe that? Clarence smiled. Don't really care what you believe. The paperwork's filed with the Greene County Recorder's Office. All public record. You can look it up right now. The security guy looked at Teresa, then back at Clarence. Do you have identification on you? In the truck. I'll need to see it. Clarence didn't move. I'll show it to a deputy when they get here. That's who you called, right? The guard shifted uncomfortably. Teresa, on the other hand, doubled down. This lake has been part of our community for decades, she snapped. Just because some shell company buys the land doesn't mean you can roll in here, act like you own it, and disrupt our peace. Ma'am, Clarence said with a steady tone, I didn't disrupt anything. You came to me. Her face flushed. You know what? Fine. Let's let the sheriff sort it out. But don't expect sympathy when they show up. Clarence leaned back in his chair, casting another line. Not looking for sympathy, just some peace and quiet. But Teresa couldn't let it go because this wasn't just about a boat. It was about control, and she was starting to lose hers. By the time Clarence packed up his gear and drove home that afternoon, the sun was beating down hard, and the silence in his truck was a welcome relief. The old leather seats creaked under his weight as he sank back, exhaling slowly, letting the quiet settle. He wasn't angry yet, but something in him stirred. Not bitterness, not resentment, just a quiet, rising reminder of what this lake meant and why he was there. His house sat about 10 minutes away, tucked just off a rural stretch of County Road 102. Nothing fancy. Modest, single-story pale green with fading white trim. The kind of house built more for living than for showing off. His dog Jasper barked once from the porch as Clarence pulled in. Clarence waved and gave a faint smile, but he didn't linger outside. Inside, he kicked off his boots, tossed his keys onto the hook, and grabbed a framed photo off the shelf near the front door. It was old, faded edges, a soft crease running down the middle. His father stood barefoot by the lake, holding a fish up with both hands, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Clarence was no older than 10 in that photo, smiling up at him with grass-stained jeans and crooked teeth. Dad, he muttered under his breath. You'd have handled her a lot better than I did. He poured himself a glass of iced tea and sat at the kitchen table. For a while he didn't move. He just sat there thinking about the look on Teresa's face, the absolute certainty in her voice, the way she wrote his name down like he was some trespasser with bad intentions. She didn't care who he was. She didn't ask. She just assumed. Clarence stood up, walked to the filing cabinet in the hallway, and slid open the bottom drawer. Inside was a blue folder marked Mayfield Lake, Title and Access. He pulled it out, laid it flat on the dining table, and flipped it open. There it was. Deed transfer from the previous landowners. Signatures from Crescent Holdings. His name as trustee. A signed agreement between the HOA and the holding company granting conditional use of the lake to the community's fishing club, renewable annually, but subject to review. No renewal had been filed in the last 10 months. He chuckled dryly. Guess they forgot who they were dealing with. The lake wasn't public. Never had been. The old owners had allowed the neighborhood access out of generosity. Clarence's father, before his death, had helped build that understanding. He believed people should be able to share in nature as long as they respected it. But after Clarence inherited the trust, the same people who once shook his father's hand had become quiet, distant. A few waves here and there. No real effort to get to know him except Teresa, of course. Teresa had never even made eye contact. He looked over the paperwork again, then again. There were no technicalities, no loopholes. The access was a courtesy, not a right, and he had every legal standing to revoke it if necessary. Still, Clarence didn't want to act on impulse. That wasn't his way. He wanted to give the benefit of the doubt, but this wasn't just about one woman's rude behavior. It was about something bigger, about entitlement, about respect. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in a while. "Hey, Mr. Lang," he said when the voice answered. "Yeah, I know it's been a minute. Listen, I need a favor. Can you pull up the HOA agreement file from 3 years ago? Specifically the fishing access clause. Yeah, I've got the physical copy here, but I want to double-check a couple things with you." He paused, listening. No rush, but yeah, it's time I take a closer look at who's been taking advantage of what my father left behind. But as Clarence hung up the phone, he had no idea just how deep the entitlement in that neighborhood ran, or how loud it would get when someone finally said no. It was early Monday morning when Clarence stopped by the Greene County Recorder's office. He didn't need to. He already had the documents at home. But something told him this time he needed things to be official, clean, bulletproof. He stood at the counter waiting while the clerk pulled up the parcel records. A few clicks later, the screen lit up with his name, the property description, and a scanned copy of the deed. Everything in black and white, the lake, the dock, the entire surrounding green belt. It was all his, held under the Crescent Holdings Trust. There were no overlapping claims. No shared easements, no community ownership. Looks like everything's in order, the clerk said with a polite smile. Clarence nodded. That's what I needed. When he got back in his truck, he took a deep breath. It wasn't about getting revenge. Not really. It was about respect. Teresa Holcomb hadn't just questioned his right to be on the water. She'd looked him in the eye and decided he didn't belong. And no matter how calm he'd stayed, her tone had made one thing crystal clear. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. Back at home, Clarence opened his laptop and pulled up a blank document. He started drafting a letter, direct, professional, and to the point. It was addressed to the Mayfield Hills Homeowners Association and its board members. He cited the terms of the original access agreement, emphasized the fact that no renewal request had been submitted for the current year, and stated that effective immediately, public access to the lake through HOA or club channels would be suspended until further notice. No angry language, no threats, just a clear revocation of access backed by documentation. He attached scanned copies of the original contract, the deed, and a notarized statement of his trustee status. By the time he was done, the message was airtight. He hit print, slid the letter and supporting documents into a thick envelope, and drove it down to the HOA office himself. It was a beige single-story building tucked behind the subdivision's main gates. The parking lot was empty except for 2 cars. He walked in and handed the envelope to the receptionist without a word. "Do you want a receipt?" she asked, clearly caught off guard. Clarence looked her in the eye. "Just make sure Teresa gets it." That evening, back home, he sat out on the porch with Jasper at his feet. The sun was setting across the tops of the trees, casting golden light across the lawn. For the first time in days, Clarence felt a flicker of peace until his phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Rucker," a man's voice said on the other end. "This is Ron Castile. I'm the acting president of the Mayfield Hills HOA board. We received your letter today." Clarence stayed quiet. Ron continued. "Look, we'd like to discuss this. Maybe there was a miscommunication somewhere. No need to escalate things." "There's nothing escalated about it," Clarence replied calmly. "The agreement wasn't renewed. Access was being used without permission. I've simply brought it back in line with the terms." "I understand," Ron said quickly. "But revoking access completely might not sit well with some of the residents. We've had use of that lake for years." "And I haven't interfered," Clarence said. "But after the way your board member approached me on Saturday, I think it's best we take a pause." There was a pause. "Well, would you be open to meeting? Maybe find a compromise?" Clarence took a long sip of water before responding. Let's see how folks handle a little humility first. He hung up without waiting for a reply, but the letter had only just landed, and Clarence had no idea the ripple it would cause behind those gates. By Wednesday morning, Clarence couldn't even pull into the grocery store parking lot without catching stares. It started with the emails, short, passive-aggressive notes from board members written in the kind of polite language people use when they're trying not to show they're furious. Then came the phone calls, some blocked, some from numbers Clarence hadn't dialed in years. But what surprised him most were the whispers coming from people who had barely spoken to him since the day he bought the property. At the hardware store, a man with a gray beard and oil-stained overalls approached him near the screws and fasteners aisle. "You Clarence?" he asked, tilting his head. "I am," Clarence replied cautiously. The man extended a hand. "Name's Billy Waller. I live on Valley Crest Drive. Been here about 20 years. Heard what happened Saturday." Clarence shook his hand but didn't say much. Billy continued. "Just wanted to say not all of us feel the way Teresa does. She's had a habit of thinking she runs this whole place." Clarence gave a short nod. "I appreciate that. She even told my wife last year that our front porch furniture didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic." "Imagine that," Billy laughed bitterly. "A chair is a chair. You either sit on it or you don't." Clarence cracked a smile. "I'll keep that in mind." That wasn't the only encounter. At the post office, someone left an unsigned note in Clarence's P.O. box. "She doesn't speak for everyone." At the gas station, a middle-aged woman waved at him, then quickly looked away when he didn't wave back. People were trying to feel him out, testing the water, but not everyone was trying to play nice. That afternoon, someone slid a flyer into his mailbox. No stamp, no envelope. It was printed on standard paper with a bold heading, "Local man revokes community lake access, retaliation, or power grab." Clarence stood on his porch reading it, shaking his head slowly. Beneath the headline, there was a small paragraph suggesting he was using his position as a weapon against the community, calling his actions disruptive and unnecessary. There was no name listed, no one to call or question, but it didn't take a genius to guess who'd written it. Later that evening, Clarence walked Jasper down the gravel path that led to the lake. He passed a couple standing near the waterline. They didn't speak, just watched him as he walked by. Their fishing poles rested against the rocks. When he got back home, Clarence sat on his porch and watched the sunset again. He wasn't looking for a fight. He hadn't started one, but it was clear the neighborhood didn't take kindly to the reminder that access was a privilege, not a guarantee. The next morning, he got another call, this time from a young woman named Andrea Preston. She lived on Lilac Bend Lane and said she was new to the HOA board, recently voted in after a string of resignations. "I just want to apologize," she said. "I wasn't there Saturday, but I heard about it. Teresa doesn't speak for everyone, and frankly, some of us are embarrassed." Clarence kept his voice calm. "That's good to know." "There's talk of calling an emergency board meeting," Andrea continued. "Some want to reverse your decision. Others think we should formally reach out and negotiate a new agreement." "I'm not interested in negotiating," Clarence replied. "I'm interested in respect." Andrea hesitated. Understood. But Clarence knew better than to think this would end with polite phone calls. Some folks weren't going to let go without a scene, and that scene was coming fast. By Friday morning, the HOA office was buzzing, not in the cheerful sense, but with tension thick enough to taste. Clarence's letter had made its rounds. Copies were passed hand to hand at backyard BBQs, forwarded through email chains, whispered about on neighborhood walks. Every member of the fishing club had read it by now, and nobody had anything neutral to say. Inside the HOA's meeting room, a modest space with beige walls and mismatched chairs, Teresa Holcomb stood at the head of the table, arms folded, lips pressed tight. She hadn't spoken yet, not officially, but everyone knew she was fuming. Ron Castile sat beside her, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We all read the letter," he said finally, his voice low and tired. "And whether we like it or not, Clarence is within his rights." One of the older members, Don Keeling, shifted in his seat. "So what? We just let him lock us out of the lake like we're trespassers?" Teresa's eyes narrowed. "He wants to make a point. That much is clear." "No," Andrea Preston said from the other end of the table. "He wants respect. And after what happened last weekend, I don't think he's out of line." Teresa turned toward her sharp. "Are you taking his side?" Andrea didn't flinch. I'm not taking sides. I'm looking at the facts. The agreement expired. We didn't renew it. That's on us. But this affects the whole community, Teresa snapped. That lake has been part of Mayfield Hills for decades. Families fish there. Kids swim there in the summer. He can't just cut everyone off because he got his feelings hurt. Ron glanced toward her. This didn't start because of feelings. It started because you accused the man of trespassing on land he owns. For a moment, the room went quiet. Meanwhile, Clarence was back at the lake, standing on the dock with a clipboard of his own. He wasn't patrolling or watching for trouble. He was taking inventory. Damage to the fencing, trash left behind, 2 broken benches near the fire pit. Things the HOA hadn't fixed in over a year, even though the access agreement clearly placed that responsibility on them. A truck slowed down behind him. The driver leaned out the window. It was Billy Waller again. You sure you want to poke this hornet's nest? He asked. Clarence didn't even look up. I didn't poke anything. I just stopped letting people stomp through my yard without asking. Billy chuckled. That afternoon, a notice went out, formally posted on the HOA bulletin board, sent via email, and stuck into residents' mailboxes in plastic sleeves to keep the rain off. The message was short. Effective immediately, access to Mayfield Lake is suspended, pending review and renegotiation with Crescent Holdings. Residents are asked not to use the dock, shoreline, or common green belt areas unless otherwise notified. Violations may result in trespass enforcement. The neighborhood's reaction was swift. A woman in her 60s stormed into the HOA office demanding answers. Teenagers were seen arguing with their parents near the trail entrance. Online forums lit up with speculation, frustration, and half-baked legal theories. One post even claimed Clarence was secretly planning to sell the lake to a private developer, though no one could say where that rumor came from. Later that night, Clarence sat on his porch again. This time, Andrea Preston came by. She knocked gently and stayed a step back. I wanted to check in, she said, and ask if you'd be willing to speak at the upcoming meeting. He raised an eyebrow. To say what? Whatever you think they need to hear, she replied. They don't know you. They just know Teresa's version. Clarence thought for a second, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll come. But agreeing to show up was one thing. Facing a room full of angry neighbors was something else entirely. The community room at Mayfield Hills filled up faster than anyone expected. Folding chairs were pulled from closets. Neighbors stood along the back wall and even outside the open doors. There hadn't been a turnout like this in years. Not for budget talks, not even for pool renovations. But that evening, everyone wanted to hear what Clarence Rucker had to say. He stood near the front, off to the side, wearing jeans and a plain button-up shirt. No podium, no papers in hand, just him, calm, watching. Teresa sat dead center in the front row, her arms crossed tight, her jaw set like concrete. Behind her were faces Clarence recognized, some vaguely, some not at all. Most were quiet. A few avoided looking at him altogether. Ron Castile stepped up first. Thanks for coming, everyone. I know this wasn't a scheduled meeting, but we felt it was important to address the concerns raised about lake access and recent events. He glanced toward Clarence, who gave a small nod. Ron cleared his throat. Clarence Rucker has agreed to speak tonight. I'd ask that we all keep things respectful. Clarence stepped forward. He didn't speak right away. He looked around the room slowly, meeting eyes when he could. My father used to bring me to this lake when I was 10, he began. Before any of this neighborhood existed. We'd fish in the morning, cook on the shore in the afternoon. I learned how to tie my first line right here. A murmur ran through the crowd. A few heads tilted. People listened. I bought the lake 3 years ago through a trust that honors his legacy. I kept access open to the community. No fees, no conditions, just expected folks to treat it with care. He paused. But when someone walks up to you, demands you leave, threatens to call the cops on your own property, that's not just about rules, that's about disrespect. A woman in the back spoke up. She didn't know who you were. Clarence looked at her. She didn't ask. There was a silence. No one tried to argue, Clarence went on. This isn't about punishing the community. It's about accountability. You've been using something that doesn't belong to you. Without maintaining it, without renewing the agreement, And at least from what I've seen, without even thinking about who's behind it. He stepped back, not trying to take the spotlight. I didn't want it to come to this, but I'm not going to apologize for asking to be treated like a person. That last sentence hit harder than he expected. A few people lowered their heads. One woman whispered to her husband. Then Teresa stood. "Why didn't you just come to us?" she asked, her voice tight. "Why go straight to shutting everyone out?" Clarence looked her straight in the eye. "You came to me first, remember?" On the dock with a clipboard and a threat. She opened her mouth to respond, but didn't. She sat back down slowly. Ron stepped forward. "We're going to open discussion now. No shouting. Keep it constructive." Several hands shot up. An older man in a fishing hat said, "I don't care who owns what. That lake is part of this neighborhood's life. Kids have grown up on it," Clarence replied evenly. "Then maybe the neighborhood should care enough to respect the person who's kept it open all this time." Another woman asked, "Would you consider renewing the agreement if the HOA handled maintenance and put real guidelines in place?" Clarence didn't answer right away. He could feel the weight in the room. They weren't just mad anymore. They were listening. "I'll consider it," he said. "But I'm not rushing." "Not until I know folks understand that this isn't just land. It's personal." But even as the meeting wound down, Clarence knew one thing. Respect couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned, and he'd just made them all think about how little they'd offered. The following days were strangely quiet. No more flyers in Clarence's mailbox, no anonymous calls, no teenagers fishing behind the reeds without permission. The same lake that had stirred up so much noise just a week ago now reflected only trees and sky. Clarence didn't expect an apology from Teresa Holcomb, and he didn't get one. But she stepped back. No more accusations, no more standoffs. Word had it she'd resigned from the HOA board to focus on personal matters, though everyone knew why. On Saturday morning, Clarence returned to the dock with a toolbox and a bucket of paint. Jasper trotted beside him, tail wagging. The benches were still busted, the fencing still loose, but he wasn't bitter about it. He wanted to fix it. Not for the neighborhood, for himself, for his father. Midway through replacing a rotted wooden plank, he heard footsteps behind him. "Need a hand?" He turned. Andrea Preston stood there in jeans and sneakers, sleeves rolled up. She held a bag of screws and a cordless drill. Clarence nodded toward the bench. "You know how to work that thing?" "I do," she grinned. "You wouldn't believe how much HOA paperwork I fixed with this drill last year." He let out a low laugh and motioned to the broken bench. "Be my guest." They worked quietly for a while. Andrea didn't fill the silence with small talk, which Clarence appreciated. After about 20 minutes, she finally spoke. "You know, there's a lot of people in the neighborhood who want to make things right." Clarence didn't look up. "Takes more than good intentions." "I know," she said. "That's why I've been talking to the new board. We're drafting a revised agreement, one that includes maintenance, cleanup schedules, and a rotating committee for oversight." He paused, then looked at her. "No more clipboards and threats?" "No more," she promised. "And any violations? They'll be handled internally. You won't be bothered." Clarence nodded slowly. "I'll read it when it's ready." Later that afternoon, another surprise came. Billy Waller returned, this time with his teenage grandson, Lucas. The kid held a trash bag in one hand and a pair of gloves in the other. "We figured we'd help out a little," Billy said. "Might not fix everything, but it's a start." Clarence didn't say much. Just handed the boy a rake and pointed toward the trail where broken glass had collected by the brush. By sundown, the dock looked new again. The benches were solid. The path was cleared, and for the first time since the whole mess started, Clarence felt something shift. Not just in the space around him, but in the people, too. At church the next morning, a few heads turned when Clarence walked in. Some nodded politely. One woman leaned over and whispered, "That lake is lucky to have you." He thanked her, even though he didn't know her name. After service, a man he didn't recognize approached him in the parking lot, tall, balding, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. "You're Clarence, right?" the man asked. "I am. I live 2 streets down. I just wanted to say my kid caught his first fish at that lake last summer. I never got the chance to thank you for keeping it open." Clarence didn't need the thanks, but it meant something. not just because it was sincere, but because it came without being forced. That night, as he walked Jasper along the trail, he thought back to his father again. The smell of fresh-cut grass, the sound of a reel spinning, the stillness of early morning water. His father used to say, "People don't always know the value of something until it's nearly gone." He understood that now more than ever. But Clarence also realized something deeper. Respect isn't handed out in letters or meetings. It's earned. Plank by plank, person by person, choice by choice. A week later, Clarence stood alone at the edge of Mayfield Lake. The air was cool, the water still, and the sunrise painted long streaks of orange across the surface. He hadn't brought his fishing rod this time. He didn't need it. He just stood quietly listening, not to the birds or the breeze, but to the absence of noise. No shouting, no conflict, just stillness. In a plastic folder under his arm was the revised access agreement. Andrea and the new board had worked hard on it. This time there were clear terms, scheduled maintenance. Days, a 3-strike rule for littering, a mandatory renewal every 12 months, no automatic carryovers, no assumptions. Most importantly, every member of the HOA fishing club would now have to take a short orientation before being allowed to use the lake. Nothing fancy, just a reminder of the lake's history, of who owned it and what it stood for. Clarence didn't do it for control. He didn't even do it for the apology that never came. He did it because letting people walk all over something precious doesn't just damage the place. It changes how you see yourself. And Clarence wasn't about to let one woman's entitlement rewrite a legacy built over decades. Later that day, he returned to the neighborhood clubhouse where the new board waited for his signature. A few familiar faces were there, some friendly, some unsure, but none hostile. As Clarence signed the last page of the agreement, Andrea leaned in. "We're going to do better," she said. Clarence nodded. "I'll hold you to that." On the way out, he passed a small group of teenagers gathered near the bulletin board. They went quiet when they saw him, unsure of what to say. Then one of them, a lanky boy with a fishing hat too big for his head, stepped forward. "Mr. Rucker," Clarence paused. "My dad told me you fixed the dock. Said I should thank you." Clarence gave a small smile. "Just take care of it." "We will," the boy said quickly. "Promise." Walking back to his truck, Clarence felt something ease in his chest, the kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from being understood, even if only a little. He thought again about that Saturday morning, about Teresa storming up with her clipboard, about how quickly she made up her mind about him. He hadn't yelled, hadn't pushed back with fire. He let the truth and the law speak for themselves. And in the end, that was enough. The lake had taught him that sometimes the best way to earn respect isn't to demand it. It's to walk with it quietly, firmly, and let others catch up. And maybe, just maybe, by standing still, you make enough noise for change. If you've ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you, where you were dismissed before anyone asked your name, remember this. Silence doesn't mean weakness, and standing your ground with dignity speaks louder than any argument. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. There's more where this came from. Real stories, human stories, lessons worth remembering.